The town of Farmington. Respecting history, planning the future.
It is now 7 o'clock. We will begin our January 24th, 2023 Town Council meeting. I believe it is Johnny or Rafina?
Rafina.
Or Joe?
Rafina.
Rafina, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item C.
Before that, Joey's going to add it.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. After public comment, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, whatever.
As I was saying, item C, public comment. We will begin with those present in the audience here. If you'll please get up, state your name, and try and keep your comments somewhat brief in respect for others here. We'll then go to those who are online to have public comment. So we are starting out with those here present. Is there anyone who'd like to make a public comment?
Tim Kelly, 62 Westview. I understand tonight we're going to hear a presentation on the renovation and repurposing of the 1928 building, which is soon to be abandoned by the school department. I went to an earlier presentation, and at that time, I think the preliminary cost estimate was about $17 million. Now, I know the committee would certainly like to present this offering in the most palatable manner to the voters going forward. But I have to say, when I looked at that preliminary estimate, it seemed like there are a couple key factors missing from the base bid. The first one was upgrade insulation, which seemed a little bit odd given the age of the building and all the studies that were done over the last 10 years when the school system was trying to figure out what to do, and all the stories of rooms being too cold and rooms being too hot, et cetera. So I suppose we could put that in for maybe a little more than $500,000, but maybe given the age of the building and all that goes with that, it would be something more like $1 million. So right there, you can go from 17, 18 million pretty quickly. The second thing that was missing was an owner's rep. And again, one would like to think this could be a crisp one-year build project. But again, once you start to open up, 100-year-old husk of a building, I think you have to realize that it can very quickly go from 12 months to 20 months and all the management that's required there. And then the third and probably most important factor was the inflation escalation and contingency percentage. So I think if there's one thing we've learned here in town recently with construction projects, it's that we can't just use sort of the standard default percentages in that line item. So it's likely you'd have to add 6 or 8%, which is, again, another $1 million. So there may be other factors to consider, but that's sort of what I took away from the initial review. And I understand there's a lot of energy in the room to try and put together the most painless financial package possible to the community. But I do think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't look at this as, at least on the top line, a $20 million program. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments here in person?
Good evening. Robert Parker, 22 Tanglewood Road. I was here just a couple weeks ago questioning the timing of this building renovation and repurposing. I feel that this whole process has been rushed through, and it's again being thrown on us at referendum in a couple of months for us to spend another total $9.5 million. Again, the timing is just wrong, especially in a revaluation year. We don't even know what's going to happen to our budget in the next couple of months with everybody's revaluation going significantly higher. And again, I've calculated that the mill rate needs to come down 6 to 7 mills for my taxes to remain the same. And I know that's not going to happen. So in a couple of years, you add the tax burden onto the high school, and then you're going to add the tax burden onto this building renovation. Can't we just take a break for a year or two and figure out, I mean, I know you're estimating that the school is going to be ready in the fall of 2024. I find that highly unlikely that that's going to be the case. And then you have to transition the high school from the old high school over to the new high school and do plenty of landscaping and what have you to the site. What's the rush? Town needs to take control of its finances and figure out where it's going before we add another 9.5 million. Now, another question I have to ask, and I don't know if we're allowed to ask questions of the council.
We generally don't respond to questions here. Many of the things you brought up and the previous person brought up will be discussed during the presentation.
Hopefully I can stay through the presentation, but I've already been asked this question from another resident. The $7 million in the American Rescue Plan Act, can that be used for something else? Can it be used to lower the town's overall debt payment for the new school? Do we need to spend it on this 1928 building? Are there other capital improvements that we can use that money for? Again, when you guys did this survey last year and 78% of the residents said they wanted to keep the school, there was no cost estimate at that time as to what this would cost us. Zero. So, I mean, that's like saying, honey, let's spend the winter in Hawaii. Everybody would like to do that. But when you look at the financial aspects of it, no, we can't afford to spend the winter in Hawaii. So now I think if you went back and you did the same survey over again, said you want to keep the school for 16.5, really 9.5, do you want to wait a couple years till we figure out what's going on with the town, or do you want to destroy the building? I think you'd have a completely separate answer than what you did last spring. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from those present? You're up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Labouthier. I live at 77 Sylvan Avenue in Unionville, and I am here tonight to just make a few comments about this project. I'm looking forward to seeing the presentation, but I understand this is the time for comments, so I'll just take a minute. I'm also representing tonight the Unionville Museum. We have been discussing this at our board meetings for a long time since the project was kind of came to light, and we are very supportive of it, and I'm here representing them as well as myself. But I just wanted to say that I do hope that our town comes together and supports this project. I want to thank the town council for just having the insight to kind of take a break and take a breath and kind of think about this building and think about its importance and think about, you know, what could we do with it? So the appointment of the committee to take a look at this was very insightful, and I appreciate it. My thanks from all of us to the committee as well. They were volunteers. They spent a whole lot of time being on these in the past. I understand that, and I want to thank them all for kind of taking a look at what could be. We feel that this project makes sense. It's innovative, it's cost effective, and it's unique. This project really defines us in Farmington, who we are culturally, socially, who we are, what's important to us. Symbolically, I think it represents good fiscal management of our resources. Politically, I think it brings us all together, no matter what party that we're a part of. And I think adaptive reuse of historic buildings is a win-win-win. Communities all over the nation, I don't have to tell the folks in this room, are taking buildings like this and they are restoring them. Just Google it. There's really some amazing projects. There is a school in East Haven that was just transformed into housing. It's incredible, and it had the use of public funds as well. So I think we're right in tune with a lot of very, very innovative communities all over the country. This building, I also don't have to remind everyone how important it is. I was thinking about it, and tens of thousands of our fellow residents have gone through this building and experienced it and have memories of it. And if we look at 95 years, at a couple hundred a year, we're talking about tens of thousands of people. And I think as a historian and as a preservationist, I think we can all agree that everyone has probably had an experience in this building. Buildings have bones, buildings have history, and buildings have memories. And I think we all have some of that. So that's why I think preserving this is something that's really important to all of us. The project preserves our history. It celebrates our heritage. It's an extension of the historic experience, as I was saying, for future generations. I think it helps us maintain the character of our town. I took a picture last year of the high school, and I sent it to a friend of mine who does photographs. And I said, can you just erase that out of the photo, with your fancy photo shopping? And can I just look at what it would be without that beautiful building on the hill? And I'm afraid to share it. I might, but it's just rather disturbing for us. So I think we've shown again and again in Farmington that preserving things works to all of our advantage. I will remind you all of how much we all work to save the Krell Farm property on the other side of town. And I think that's going to be one of the most wonderful public open spaces for future generations that we preserved. Farmington is our name, and I'm glad that we preserved some of the farms. Suburban Park, in my section of town, I have to say we worked very hard to save that. Many people in this room worked very hard to save that piece of property. And I can honestly say thanks to a wonderful Eagle Scout who did a wonderful, wonderful job at bringing its history back. It is now, I live right near there, visited by all kinds of folks every day. It's nice to see it being used again. And lastly, as a member of the museum, I know all of you have seen our museum. We just were able to do a wonderful historic preservation of the Carnegie Library, which is an important gem as part of the history of Farmington. And we are happy to be the stewards of it. And we are really pleased at the support that we receive from everyone to help preserve it and bring it into use for the next generation, which is what we see this project is doing for the high school. So we've lost some treasures. I know there isn't a time that goes by when we talk about the old town hall in Unionville. Many of us remember that. So we know what it's like to have something that's important and lose it. And that's why I think we're going to work extra hard to be supportive of this project. I know that there are a lot of folks that have concerns about taxes and how much it costs. And I think it's all very important. And I also think that we need to think that there is a cost as well to our community and to our history as well. So I thank you again for all your work. I'm looking forward to this presentation. And I want to urge everyone to support this project. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here in the building?
Good evening, everyone. Matt Hudfagner for Deepwood. Just for me, a quick comment on the ARPA funding, just sort of comment on that. And I think it'd be helpful just to talk about the permitted uses for that. sort of my understanding, it was sort of post-pandemic health and safety. As you all know, our elementary schools have no HVAC at all. You have to just open a window and turn the fan on. And I think now we all learned about air circulation. 2, it's really warm in those buildings in the summer. It's really warm in those buildings in September and in June. And even now, it's even a warmer winter, right? There's not a lot of airflow. So is that part of the plan? So that's really my comment. I look forward to the presentation. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Other comments for those present here today? Seeing none. Devin, do we have anyone online?
We do have participants online. I don't see any hands at the moment, but we'll give everyone another moment.
If anyone online would like to speak, raise your virtual hand, and we will virtually call on you. Going twice. Hearing none. Okay. We are closing public comment. We are moving on to item D, consideration of special topics.
Can I just make a motion, sir?
Yes.
Just for new business, we're going to add item E1, would be for a vacancy on the Unionville Historic District.
Second?
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will add that item. Thank you. Now, item D1.
Want to call him Peter?
Yes. If the chair of the 1928 Building Committee will come forward, Mr. Master Batista, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us to do our presentation on behalf of the committee. I think it's important to recognize the members of this committee. We have met a lot since May, and they have done a lot of work, all of us collectively. Let's start off myself. I'm the chairman, Peter Master Batista. Gene Barron is with us. Joe Capitaferro's on the council, or on the committee with us. Chris Fagan, Jack Kemper, Dan Kleiman, and Mike Walsh. And then town staff is Kathy, Kat Grajewicz, Russ Arnold, Scott Hurwitz, and Devin Alvin. And on that note, I'd like to hand it over to Kathy. She's going to give a more detailed summary of the work that we've done since the beginning of May. And then Chris will do a PowerPoint on the building itself. And then if you would please, we'd like to do the whole presentation. And then after the presentation, we'll open it up for questions and answers.
Great, thank you.
So on that note, Kathy?
Thank you, Peter. Good evening. I'm Kathy Blonsky, Town Manager and Building Committee member. As the result of a successful referendum, a new Farmington High School is being constructed adjacent to the existing high school. As part of that project, the majority of the existing high school is slated to be demolished in the summer of 2024. The 1928 section of the existing high school is considered a landmark by many residents and visitors in Farmington. For that reason, a townwide survey was conducted in the spring of 2022 to determine if there was support from the community to retain the 1928 building. The results of that survey indicated that 77.8% of the respondents supported retaining the 1928 building. Project timing. The existing high school is slated to be demolished in the summer of 2024, leaving 2 of the 4 walls exposed to the outside elements and in need of masonry repairs and restoration. If the 1928 building is to be retained, the timing of the project should be in conjunction with the Farmington High School. Another important factor of why these projects should be in conjunction is that renovating the 1928 building minimizes construction time on the site. Additionally, completing the project in this period enables the town to use its significant ARPA funds, which need to be obligated by December 2024 to offset the cost of the project. Lastly, doing these projects in conjunction may result in cost savings, especially in the site work. Not doing these projects in conjunction is not practical financially or structurally. Statement of needs. In April 2022, the Town Council approved the Statement of Needs for the 1928 Building Committee. The needs of the town are as follows. Town hall operations need more space and are inefficiently located in satellite offices across town. This includes departments in the existing town hall, the probate offices, recreational offices, and social service offices. Space for additional town storage. Per records retention laws, files must be kept for long durations. Storage at the town hall is limited, and the new records facility at the water pollution control facility is rapidly filling up. Throughout town, there is a lack of space for community use, including but not limited to meeting space, event space, nonprofit use, and art and business incubator use. Gym space for basketball, pickleball, volleyball, and additional recreation programs are needed. The building committee's work, April 2022 to January 2023. In April and May of 2022, the Town Council approved the Statement of Needs and appointed in charge the 1928 Building Committee to evaluate two options and the needs. Option 1 was to retain and renovate the 1928 building as a standalone project, only retaining the existing 1928 building. Option 2 was retain and renovate the 1928 plus option. That was retaining and renovating the 1928 building plus other existing portions of the building. From June through August, the 1928 Building Committee selected Silver Petrocelli Associates to serve as the project architect. The project architect conducted space needs assessments with town department heads and the town manager. In September of 2022, the project architect recommended preliminary design options to the 1928 committee, and the committee subsequently recommended the removal of the 1928 plus option to the town council. The town council then recharged the committee to complete a schematic design and develop schematic pricing for the renovation of the 1928 building as a standalone building. In the fall of 2022, the 1928 Building Committee recommended that the 1928 building be renovated into the new town hall and the existing town hall become the town hall annex. In the following months, the committee and the project architect continue to develop the design and cost estimates. Earlier this month, the project architect presented the schematic design and the pricing to the 1928 Building Committee, and tonight the committee will present the recommendations to the Town Council. I will now turn the presentation over to Chris Nardi, the project architect. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher Nardi, Principal and Project Architect with Silver Petrocelli and Associates. I'd like to walk you briefly through the plans. These were reviewed at a previous council meeting in a slightly different form. There have been some minor tweaks since the last time we met, but for everyone's, in order for everyone to be most up to date with the plans, I want to just hit the highlights. So what we're looking at is the first floor or ground level plan of the 1928 building. The outline is roughly a T shape, including this large blue area, which is the current band room in the high school, and then this main bar across, which is part of the original 28 building. The only piece that is not original is this small one-story security vestibule and elevator addition that we are proposing as part of this 28 project. And the rationale for that is currently there is no on-grade ADA access into the 28 building. The current elevator within the structure is undersized and does not meet ADA requirements, and it's also located more central to the building versus where an entry would be proposed to allow folks easy access to that elevator. So you would enter the building off the northwest side in this pink area. As I mentioned before, the current band room would be repurposed to a multi-purpose gymnasium space where we could fit 2 basketball hoops, a pickleball court, and a volleyball court, multi-use in that space, as well as a classroom below that court area, which would be used primarily for the rec department. Additionally, there's another small classroom in the upper right-hand portion of the plan for use by the rec department and new toilet rooms in the green that would serve all of these spaces on the first floor. In terms of town departments, the clerk, the tax collector, and the tax assessor, as well as the registrar of voters would all be located on this floor, including the town clerk's vault, which would be increased from roughly 700 square feet in its current size to 1,000 square feet. And that square footage is really dictated by the state based on the town's population. So right now, what you have in terms of 700 square feet is undersized per the state's recommendation for Farmington. Moving up to the second floor, working within the existing confines of the exterior walls is the development suite, which is public works, building official, etc. In the orange, and then in the green in the upper right-hand corner would be the IT department. In this teal color are existing toilet rooms that would be renovated in their current location. You can see the elevator addition in this black rectangle on the upper left-hand side. And as you come off the elevator, there would be storage for the development suite, as well as the custodial's office and storage, and then a shared town break room for all town staff on this floor as well. Moving up to the third floor, as you come off the elevator in the light blue is rec offices. In the green would be the finance department. Again, in the teal is renovated toilet rooms in their current location. The darker blue is the town manager's suite, which includes the conference room. And then adjacent to that space would be a multi-purpose shared training room, as well as shared town storage for records retention, tables and chairs, etc. This is a site plan depicting the 28 building and its surroundings. Monteith Drive, for reference, would be to the bottom right-hand corner. So Route 4 at the bottom, you'd come up the hill. The new high school would be off to the upper right-hand side. This is the future Board of Ed office. And then what you're seeing in white is the parking lot that is proposed for the high school. So 28 building in the tan here. And we are proposing a dedicated town hall 1928 parking lot to the left of the building, distinct and separate from all of the high school parking. As you can see, there are gray lines here that represented tennis courts. In discussions with the high school team, the architect, O&G, the construction manager, we are in discussions of relocating these tennis courts so that they're closer to the high school. And we're really trying to create a distinction between the high school lot and the town hall lot. Even though this is a campus, we want to separate those functions and as much as we can eliminate crossing traffic between the two. So in order to get to the 28 lot, you would come up Monteith, take a left, and you would pass by all of the high school parking to what is a dedicated lot over here. So there really would be no mix. And we would reinforce that with signage throughout the site of dedicated town hall parking versus the high school areas. We also want to, in some sense, keep that campus feel by tying into the pathways, pedestrian pathways that were planned as part of the high school project. So as you can see here, there's a site circulation pattern that ties this entire campus together, allowing access to the courts, perhaps a paved area outside the 28 building, the new entrance in the location of my cursor, and so on. We're also looking at increasing the buffer or green space between the 28 building and the high school parking lot by shifting some of the parking that was planned to be right up against the 28 building to this upper section of the lot you see here in gray. This is a conceptual rendering of the 28 building post-construction. We're looking at it from the north. You can see the tennis courts in the foreground. To the right-hand side is the proposed Town Hall 28 parking lot. In the back, this two-story piece is the current band room, which would be repurposed for the multi-purpose room. This one-story piece with the white roof is the new proposed addition, with the elevator shaft you can see in brick. And then the remainder is a truly restored 1928 building, trying to bring it back to its original form, which for the most part it currently is, with exception of the two exterior walls, being this north wall and the west wall. So really these two sides of the building, as the additions were built over the years and tacked onto this structure, additional holes were created, structure was modified. So those are the two faces of this building that when the high school comes down, there are going to be areas exposed to the elements, areas that will need to be restructured and repaired in order to allow this building to stand alone, which reinforces Kathy's point to combining, or at least coordinating the the construction of these two projects in a close time frame. A perspective rendering as you exit the parking lot and approach the new proposed addition. So this is the secure lobby vestibule and then the elevator tower in the background. A view as you're coming up the hill, and really this is very similar to as the building looks now and as it looked in its original day. In fact, this picture in the bottom right-hand corner is a historic photo of the 28 building, we believe shortly after it was constructed, and our rendering is the larger image, which is proposed when this project is complete. So there's not a lot that needs to be done to these two sides other than restoration, replacement of windows, restoring the cupola, really to bring that back to its original appearance. And then this is an actual image taken off of Google Earth from Route 4, just to really get a sense of what it looks like now and to express that that view really won't change. You're going to see from this distance, the building will appear the same as it does currently. And the trees are shading the rest of the high school, which would obviously be gone if this 28 project were to move forward after completion. In terms of the project cost, we worked with a third-party estimator, PAX LLC, and they really did the legwork on the construction or the hard costs. And we had multiple meetings with them following their first pass estimate, some just with our team of architects, engineers, but additional meetings with town staff. Russ Arnold was a huge help representing the town in making sure that elements were picked up that need to be carried over into this project, either items that currently exist in this town hall or items that are desired to be in a new town hall if that opportunity does come to fruition. So I want to walk you briefly as I took what was a 14-page overall document from PAX in terms of the hard construction costs and tried to break it down into some simpler line items of construction. And so I'll walk through these briefly. General conditions, bonds, insurance, and general contractor overhead and profit is the first line item at about 1.5 million. Environmental abatement and demolition, so removing all hazardous materials from this building and the selective demo required within the building as well as on the building exterior after the high school comes down at 1.1 million. Structure repairs and building envelope. This includes the restoration of the 28 building. It includes new roofs on both the shingled area as well as the flat roofs behind that gabled structure or hip structure. It also includes new windows, new doors on the exterior, and then adding new insulation to the interior face of all the 28 walls. So what is proposed in this estimate are 2.5-inch metal studs filled with spray foam insulation, which is going to add about R12 to R15 to that building envelope of the existing 28 building, which is currently an uninsulated masonry and plaster exterior wall structure. And that total was about 2.6 million for all that restoration and envelope repairs. Doors, frames, and hardware, including access control, 559,000. Interior partitions and ceilings, including all painting and wall coverings of partitions, $714,000. New flooring and finishes throughout the building, $538,000. built-in casework, so that's reception desks, break room casework, and then some casework in mail copy rooms such as base cabinets at roughly $150,000. Toilet accessories, signage, and miscellaneous items such as fire extinguishers, small items, $115,000. A modular vault at $250,000. So this is the town clerk's vault. And in these existing structures, we're seeing more and more people going in towns choosing to go the route of a modular vault. It's really the most effective way to insert a vault into an existing structure. Those vaults carry 4-hour fire ratings, which this building does not currently have. So you're looking at going in and either building a masonry or concrete structure within the existing 28 building versus a modular vault, which comes in as a series of panels and partitions that get erected within the space and don't carry the same loads and weights and difficulties of construction that masonry or concrete structure would bring. And we've done these in both Watertown and East Haddam town hall renovations within the last 5 years. So that would be $250,000. The elevator cab and controls at $145,000. That does not include the masonry shaft. That was included in the exterior repairs. And then we get into the major engineering elements. So fire protection modifications throughout, $175,000. All new plumbing, $235,000. New heating, ventilation, air conditioning, $2,157,000. All new electrical, panels, wiring, looking at reusing some of the new infrastructure where the service comes into the building that's relatively new, but mostly all new. Electrical, in terms of lighting especially, is about $1.2 million. And then site work, again, at about $1.2 million. And for the site work, we estimated full site development costs, if I take a step back, in what is the colored area surrounding our parking lot that goes just up to the perimeter of the tennis courts and then comes back around to this green area. So really this area of the site plan, full site development, and we have been in discussions with the high school team about how we can streamline and come up with a more cost-effective solution for the town, that if these projects do run in conjunction, potentially having one site contractor versus having two site contractors, working on drainage systems, et cetera, that really tie together and would be most efficient to do with one pass. All that said, what I'll call the hard construction costs of those elements comes to $12,572,000. At this stage of a design, which is schematic design, it's very typical to carry a 10% contingency on that number, which we have done. So that adds about $1.1 million. And then for escalation to get us into 2024 at 6%, which is another $736,000. So those numbers combined come to $14,426,000, which is the number estimated you would get from a general contractor on bid day to construct the facility that's been presented. In addition to that, we've included typical soft costs, so architecture and engineering design fees, bonding and legal fees, commissioning agent, testing and inspections, builder's risk insurance, moving and relocation costs, FF&E and technology. And in discussions with the town, there's belief that a lot of the furniture in this town hall that is relatively new could be repurposed and brought up to the 28 building to stay with the department that it currently resides. And the last item, an owner's contingency of 5% that you would want to carry into construction. So soft costs totaling almost $2.2 million and a total project cost therefore of just under $16.6 million, which is $445 a square foot.
Could you go back to the other screen?
I think you hit
Oh, I'm
the button
sorry,
on
numbers.
accident.
My apologies.
Yep.
So the soft costs are in between these two orange lines. The total hard cost of 14.426 million is that green line item. And then in the blue at the bottom, the total project cost, including hard costs and soft costs, just under 16.6 million. Thank you.
The 1928 Building Committee recommendations. I will now discuss the Building Committee recommendations, the federal ARPA funds, and the next steps for the Town Council. Based on the statement of needs, the 1928 building is recommending the following. 1, that the 1928 building be renovated into the new Town Hall. The existing Town Hall would become the Town Hall Annex, with space provided for community use, social service programs, additional storage, and an expanded regional probate court. An example of community use in the Town Hall Annex could be the Farmington Food Bank, who needs the space for their programs. Number 2, that the Town Council approve the design presented and a project budget not to exceed $16,597,919. ARPA funds. In March of 2022, the Farmington Town Council determined that the town's ARPA funds should be used for large, long-term capital projects. The town of Farmington has a remaining balance of roughly $7.4 million in ARPA funds, which need to be obligated by December 31st, 2024. Utilizing ARPA funds for this project would offset the net municipal cost or the amount that the town anticipates it will bond for this project. Next steps. The Town Council needs to determine the following. 1, the total project budget for the committee. 2, if ARPA funds will be used for this project and the amount of the ARPA funds. 3, the net municipal cost of the project, which is the total project cost minus the ARPA funds allocated. Next, the timing of the referendum. Next, then they need to charge the 1928 Building Committee to complete the schematic design in line with the net municipal cost. It should be noted that the net municipal cost will not be finalized until the Town Council sends the project to referendum. We'll now take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start with questions from the council here. Who would like to start us off? Brian? Any questions?
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. That did answer a lot of questions that I had, and thank you to the committee for your work. We do have a beautiful building in town, and I can see that there is certainly some need for the town, absolutely. A couple of questions that I did have, you did answer, because I was curious about the elevator. It's nice to see there's a new elevator shaft going in. And you talked a little bit about the removal of asbestos. We were told there was a lot of asbestos in the building. Does this mean we were getting rid of all the asbestos in the building? I'm just curious about that.
That is correct. Any hazardous elements, asbestos, lead paint,
Okay.
PCBs, etc.
And is the second elevator going to remain in the building?
That elevator is being infilled and repurposed for program throughout.
Oh, okay, so there's not going to be an elevator there?
Correct.
We did talk at one point about finding out cost options if we weren't going to keep the building. We had talked at one point about finding other options in town to fulfill the needs that we do have. Was there any exploration of other resources that we could use?
Not with this group right here. We weren't talking, this is basically their task is the 1928 building.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
I think that's what I got.
Okay. Ed?
Yeah, sure. I have a couple questions. First, I'd like to thank the committee. I actually watched your last meeting and really appreciate all the hard work, thoughtful questions and all the hard work that you put into this process to get to this point and present this to us. Thank you. In the presentation, you talked about the site work, and there's some potential synergies between the new high school project as well as this project. And if I'm understanding correctly, those are not in this budget that you've presented here, those potential savings. So of that $1,991,390, not to hold you to a particular number, but is there a ballpark, a range of what we might anticipate in additional savings that could come from those synergies of the site work? And is that something that could be quantified before we go to referendum, or will we not know that until the work starts?
It's a discussion we started with the high school team and will continue to have. It's really difficult, and I wouldn't want to put a number on it tonight, but I believe that we'll have a better understanding before the referendum of what that number is.
Great, thank you.
Very good use of synergies, by the way.
I know. I should have used that in the presentation.
I know. Keith?
Thanks, everybody, for your work. My question may be for Joe. The bonding on this, do we know when that would occur? Is that after?
That's
Yeah,
gonna be all
that'll
part
be
of
the
Joe's-
financial, the
Or
next
Joe's
step. Yep.
Yeah.
I have no questions at this time.
Okay. Joe?
I'm on the committee, I can defer for now.
Okay.
I'll take his questions. Thank you, everyone, for the presentation. It looks like a beautiful building, and from somebody who wasn't born here, raised here, but I got here as quickly as I could, I understand the lure of wanting to keep this building, not only for the nostalgia, even though it may not be technically a landmark historic, because it's only, 95-ish years old. I understand the want of keeping it. I think when we're thinking about going to referendum, though, we have to do more than just thinking about wanting to keep something. We've all been through the last high school building referendum too, for some of us. And there were things I remember during that presentation where, if I remember correctly, it was for Board of Ed office suites, just like literally this much in the grand scheme of things. I think it maybe was $1 million or something like that in the line item of the whole, the greater whole. And people were very, very anti-suites for anybody. And we're talking about saving space for the town manager suite, and I understand that there's need, but what are the things, or are there any things that we can trim from this that would be more palatable to people when they go to the polls to say, hey, I understand the need for this. I get the space for the gym and for the rec department and those things, I understand that. But, for the vault, for example, Kathy, are those things that are required by the state, that we have to have a vault in place in the town of Farmington for 1,000 square feet?
Yes.
Okay, so is there any place, I don't know, okay, that's something that we need, but I'm just looking at the overall budget for the building. I think that the residents are gonna be very wary of voting for something that just looks like it's a lot of extra, things that we may not necessarily need.
Well, I think one of the things that we talked about quite a bit in the committee is that we're using the existing space that's already there. And we're not creating new space, we're using the space that's already there. And Chris and his team has been designing the space to use the existing space. And most of the additional space in general that is being used in there is for storage space, it's for conference rooms, it's for community use, things like that. The actual office space, yes, it's enlarged compared to what it is here, but one, we have the need for it, and number two, it's forever type of thing. But again, if you said, and I'm making up the numbers, but I'll take me for an example and say, okay, well, I'm getting a 300 square foot office, and that's the office that they designed because it fit in there. Could have I had a 200 square foot office? Yes, probably that would have done, but it didn't fit into the plan. And that's why, they drew it out in the existing space. And I don't think the office space in general for everyone is considered an abundance of office space.
Right, and that, I didn't mean to imply that it was abundance. I just think when people are looking, your average taxpayer, average resident that's going, they're like, oh, these are offices for the town manager, whomever, and this is what that's all they're getting. They're not seeing, I guess, the need I think, for it.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to do is, as the committee has talked about, when you talk about the need, is to walk around this town hall and see the need. When you look at the registrars who are across the hallway in the closet over there, the probate office who definitely doesn't have enough space. When you look at all the different, in Russ Arnold's development wing, when you have his conference rooms stacked with storage up to the top, where in my office, we built another closet and took away an office so I could put records in. So I think when you tour the town hall and see when this town hall was built and you see the need for the space, I think that people really would see more so where, you know, again, that there's just not enough space. And the conference room space is that, you know, every office that's trying to have meetings taking place, the public that's trying to use it. We have to, with the Board of Ed group, that, you know, you're a month in advance to try to get the space. So I think those things, like, and what a lot of people don't understand, and I think it's a good time, is that we're in a computer age right now, but municipalities and government can basically never get rid of records. And so the more that, you know, we're saying everything's on the computer and why do you need all the space? We're not allowed to, it takes a long time to get rid of any type of records, and we have mapping. And you go into development wing and you see just piles and piles of maps, and you're just never allowed to get rid of them. And we built at the treatment plant a storage facility, and that storage facility, basically we tried to clean up as much as we could out of here and brought it there, and now that's filled. And so those are the things. It's not, I mean, we definitely need office space and synergies of how the assessor works with the town clerk and how that person works with the tax office, and all of that's going to be more efficient. But I think the biggest things about this is that we're going to have the rec space, we're going to bring all our offices together, and we're going to have much more storage and conference room space.
So all of that you just said was
Yeah.
wonderful. But how do you distill that information down and you communicate it to the voters? Because we have such a short timeline before we have to go to referendum.
I think that the next thing that we're going to try to do is have our couple of coffees with the committee. We're going to have tours of the town hall. We're getting out another newsletter. We're trying to use the same kind of communication plan we did for the high school. So after tonight's meeting, another newsletter is planning on going out, again, talking about the space needs, encouraging people to have a tour, have them have a tour here so we can show the space and the different things. We have an updated website that we're working on, a Q&A answers, and different things like that. So that's what our goal is.
I also had another question about the parking. So you mentioned that, I think on one of the slides, you moved some of the parking where you were originally thinking about it and put it a little closer to the high school. Does that mean that we lost some of the parking from the original high school plan?
No, the high school parking spaces are one-to-one what they were bid at for that project versus what we are suggesting could be a solution to combine these two uses on campus. So no reduction in high school parking, just an addition of the parking spaces to the left-hand side of the 28 building.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all you got? I have so much more.
Go ahead, John. Start it out.
So
I do have
I'm going to
some
try to stay somewhat in the same topics as I go through my million notes here. Let's talk about pricing for a minute. In that, if you can go to the schematic with showing the different areas, the different floor plans. When you guys looked at this, you have the outside structure remains the same. It looks like we found out kind of between where the FHS building committee had looked at this a couple of times, that there was an actual room off the back that originally is now the band room that existed. So I know that changed a little bit. But within the interior of the building, are you sticking to the same bearings, the same structure that's there? Are you getting into modifying that structure?
That's a great question. So we've retained the existing structure. The corridors, which you see in gray, particularly this large gray band running left to right down the middle of the plan, that is the existing main corridor in the 28 building with the stair tower at each end, which remains. The only changes we're making are the non-bearing partitions. It might be easier to see on this third floor. So we're keeping those bearing walls down the corridor, existing circulation patterns, and then modifying the non-bearing partitions on either side of that corridor to rearrange office suites to meet the needs of the town hall departments.
Good. building on that, does the town or have you looked into, because I know the building committee, which I want to put on the record, was 3 referendums, by the way, right, Gene? With 3
I was
for
only
7
here for
years.
2.
But anyways, did you guys have a chance to dive into that structure? Because obviously 1928, building codes don't come in till the 70s. What we're talking about, pounds per square foot, any kind of forensic analysis, any kind of just even just touching or scratching the paint back to see what kind of shape it is? I know there's existing school activities going on, so the timeframes are, but what kind of work have you done examining or looking at that, either through old blueprints or field analysis?
Yeah, we did a thorough investigation of existing drawings. Unfortunately, the original plans are not available. We did find most of the renovation work that occurred after that, starting with the 50s edition, which gave us really the insight of what that original 28 building was, because being the first project after, it was showing, and everything that wasn't new was existing, right? In terms of being out in the field, we've walked and looked at every area of this building we can. Unfortunately, due to the plaster construction, there are a lot of areas that are not visible, but using what knowledge we had from the renovation drawings, plus just our experience of buildings in this era and construction methods in this era, we feel we had a good sense of what's going on and what would need to be done to accomplish this project structurally.
Okay, and what about the roof system? I'm assuming it's a truss system of some kind.
Correct.
Back in 1928.
Yes.
And that, I know that's probably in the attic, and only a few people ever get up there. Have you guys looked at that? The reason I'm asking is really for the big question, like, what are the unknowns in these numbers? After going through the last 7 years and the last 2, and going back to another referendum to ask for more money, the last thing I want to do is A, pigeonhole the budget, or B, inflate the budget, but at least have some sort of confidence that if we set a number, that things have been looked at. The roof truss systems, I know I've heard a million times the cupola's got to get renovated, that it is in very rough shape. So have all these things been taken into consideration?
They have. It's actually quite a large attic. We walked up there with our engineers, structural, mechanical, plumbing, electrical. There's mechanical equipment up there right now. We did analyze the roof joists or the trusses in the 28 building. The floor structures were not visible due to the plaster. And I appreciate your question. We're never going to find everything at this point, which is what those built-in contingencies are for. So that 10% design contingency that we carry at this level is just for that. Items that we know are out there, and even with the most thorough analysis at this point, there's going to be something that pops up. So we feel confident in the number that we've addressed the major issues of this building and done our best to examine those major concerns. But we do still obviously carry that contingency with us for any minor items that may pop up during the rest of the design process.
Seeing that we're in concept, I'm assuming that the estimator used a lot of square foot pricing. Can you just tell us a little bit about their background? Do they have a history of dealing with larger renos and buildings of this area? Because obviously, escaping what's happened in the last 2 years, nobody could have addressed that. But at least knowing that the square foot numbers they're using are very typical of a lot of these unknowns. You can't see behind the plaster. You can't get underneath the flooring. Can you assure us that this estimator has worked on projects like this in the past? I'm assuming the building committee has probably asked this question very early on, but just so the public has the...
Yeah, he is from Connecticut originally. He doesn't live here now. He works remotely on the estimates. Tom Arden was the lead estimator on this. And yes, we've worked with PACS quite often on multiple renovation as well as new building construction projects. So he is very involved in Connecticut construction specifically, and very active in today's market with both subcontractors and construction managers in terms of what's being bid at today's prices. His His background, I believe, is in actually site work mostly. So if you were to look at the breakdown of the site work on this, he's very, very knowledgeable in that area, but obviously doing this for many, many years, he carries the knowledge of all construction divisions as well.
Another question on your breakdown for the pricing, you had a design fee, it was like 8%, or I can't remember, it's probably 600,000. But right now, we're in concept, you guys have already authorization for schematic, is that correct, the building committee? And then that fee would just be to go from schematic to final construction docs?
Correct. It was a 6% fee based on the construction cost, and that would be to take us through construction documents from where we are today. Correct.
Okay. Crossing mine off the list right now. What?
Flooring on the third.
The pool on the third floor?
No. No, the flooring.
Oh my God, don't bring the pool up.
No, there's no pool. Nobody said anything about a pool.
All right, well, I'm sure the chairman will give you more questions. I just want to switch gears just a little bit here. So tonight we're being asked to kind of set a project number. And my biggest fear I shouldn't say fear, that's probably too much of a word, but English was not my major. We're getting into the heart of budget season. And I know this is not a question to you, this would be more of a time frame kind of process. You guys laid out a high-level time frame of, getting through this next steps and getting to design and then being ready for when, the school construction's supposed to have kids in the fall of '24. That's when the demolition starts, all the utilities will be stubbed out. If we were to, let's say, push this off for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and I know that this is alluded to, not necessarily 2-3 years, I understand that, but more from a standpoint that we have a reval year. And, we can talk about taxes and there's a million ways to look at that. What is the revenue spend? What is that? Last year, we saw a 25% increase in the auto alone, which really was a godsend to our budget. This year was a reval, and more specifically, the shift between having our residential values versus our commercial values. And if there's a shift there, and I know we're not there, we have all the data, it's being crunched. Is the time frame of this project to a standpoint, or maybe you could dig in a little bit more on some of the target dates and how you backed into this meeting? And even if we had 1 month where Joe can come up here in the town and we start to dive into all the budget data, feel more comfortable, that before we throw this out there, that we have a better sense of where that tax base is going to be. I know that's a really loaded question, and I'm not looking for specifics. It's more on that time frame and how does that work out? Would something like that even be attainable?
I think that the council's going to discuss about the timing of the referendum. I think that we had talked about internally at the committee that if the council chose, I think that you're going to have pretty much a close to like a June date. And so instead of having it during the budget time in April, I think our budget referendum's mid-April this year, you could probably push it to June. I think we talked about doing it in June and being able to still have the timing with the high school project, not much long after that, because we have to design and get it, so as you know, to have it go together. One of the things, and again, I'll just briefly speak to it, and then the council can have some debate about it, is that one of the things that we talked about, or we're going to talk about, is that during the budget process, you're going to be talking about the 1928 building anyway, because if you're gonna have it in June versus in April, all the numbers are gonna be there anyway. We've just discussed all the numbers. So it's a question of saying, okay, we're not gonna put it on the budget in in April at the budget referendum, we're gonna do it in June. I just worry in some ways you're going through the whole process anyway at that time, because you have all the numbers, you're just pushing, and for us, for the design purposes, we don't have to wait. We're ready, we'll be ready to go. If the council wants to wait for whatever reason as a policy decision, I think we talked about June being about the latest you could go.
Johnny, I'm just wondering whether you're answering the same question Johnny was asking. I think he was talking about tonight's decision to set the cost. Do we have the possibility of having that in a few weeks when we have more information on our overall budget and where the balance will be between residential and commercial, those numbers.
Yes, the only issue that we have is that getting that number, you're setting a budget for the group. And if the budget changes dramatically, making sure that we can make those changes and then still design by a referendum date. The other question is that, and we do have the time, it's just that we're not, in any of our literature or anything that goes out, we're not putting that budget out there to let people know what it is. And we've kind of learned from some of our past practices that when people don't know what it's going to cost, and then you bring the number out too late. Now, a couple of weeks and things like that, but you're really not going to know you're going to know more, absolutely you're going to know more information in the budget soon. But you're still really not going to know what your budget is until you guys...
We get into the hard March.
Yeah.
So if we were to wait till we have really good information, we would be past that time frame. So in 2 weeks, we'll know a little bit more, but not enough to make a better decision.
And you have to remember, when you send it to referendum, you have the blackout period. So you're going to send it to referendum like probably early April to get on a referendum vote at the end of April. So, we're in now the end of January. It really doesn't leave a lot of time to do a lot of the legwork communication-wise.
Okay. Final question, I promise. It was alluded to in the ARPA funds, and I know you covered some of it, but there was a public comment earlier about ventilation projects or air conditioning projects in the existing schools that we have. We currently have funding going towards ventilation projects next year and the year after between the two schools.
4 schools. All we're doing.
Correct. So and I know that people are asking about the ARPA funds, but there's currently separate funding for those projects in place.
Projected.
I thought that was because we're getting a grant from the state, right? So we don't have those yet?
We're hoping to get a grant from the
Okay.
state.
No, I just to be, understood that the ARPA funds could be used towards that, but we do think we have a separate source for those ventilation projects.
When you say the source, who do you mean?
Board of Ed.
Right. So yes, the thought is that is targeted in their capital plan. It hasn't been approved yet because we have to go through a budget process, but it's targeted to do the ventilation in their upcoming capital improvement plans. We haven't seen their most recent, but in their 6-year plan, it has shown, and we've talked about it.
And then the last question. The ARPA funding, I know it was also mentioned tonight from neighbors about supplementing our budgets for taxes. I know there was some really stringent rules in the beginning, and the town of Farmington chose to wait for a little bit. But as the rules stand today, could we take that money and just supplement our budget?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Joe to answer that. The rules have got much more wider, but I wasn't sure about the debt, Joe. I read it if they could do debt. I didn't think you could do debt payments, but could you speak to that?
Basically, it stands right now, you could use that ARPA funds for pretty much anything except for any type of liability, long-term liability. Now, whether debt constitutes that's long-term liability, whether it could be used for it's up in the air. Some people have used it. The one definite you cannot use it for is pension liabilities. That's specifically spelled out in the ARPA language. The other thing you should remember I talked about this last year, budget time. We took the ARPA money, and there was a provision in the ARPA Act that said you could take the money as lost revenue. And initially there was this convoluted formula you had to use. Based on the formula, you could take in X number of dollars as lost revenue. They subsequently changed that, and they actually gave you a larger dollar amount. Basically, they said you could take up to $10 million of your ARPA funds as lost revenue in your budget. So over the past 2 years, what we've done is we've gotten $7.5 million. We've taken in the entire $7 million technically as lost revenue. So it's basically right now sitting out there and it's waiting to be appropriated for whatever the town wants to appropriate it for. But the only caveat being, I'm pretty sure you cannot use it for pension liabilities, and I probably would suggest or recommend not using it for retirement debt. So other than that, we pretty much can use it at this point for, you can use it for anything. Towns are using it for a variety of things. A lot of things I wouldn't recommend, but they are using it for that. You know, a lot of people are supplementing their operating budget with it, but as Kathy mentioned, you have to obligate this money by 24, by the end of 24. You have to fully spend it by the end of 26. So you really want to be smart about, it's not going to be there after 26. So you don't want to do something with it, rely on it now and thinking that it's going to be there beyond 26, because it won't be. So if you have something with a cost that goes beyond 26, you're going to have to add that into your budget at that point.
Okay, thank you.
And just one point, I think, on the different uses of the ARPA fund. If we were to use these funds for any project, like a school project, where we can potentially get funds from the state, if we use this for any of the high school project costs, we would then not get the 30%. So by spending this money, you're giving up what the state funds would be for that. So just something else to consider. Okay, any other questions? Go ahead, Rafina.
Okay. So we've used budget a number of times, talking about this budget and that budget. Can you just, like, really simply, so if we were to, at this council meeting, decide that we are going to approve the $16 million, whatever, okay, almost $17 million budget, then that goes to Joe, and then he runs the numbers, and then he tells us this now becomes part of our larger town budget?
No.
No.
No, so what Joe is going to do next, he's going to run numbers showing it, so you have your financial forecast. So his next thing is he's going to run numbers and show how the financial forecast is if the council uses the ARPA funds and what the project cost is. So that would be where it goes. This does not become part of any type of budget until it goes to a referendum vote, and then that would then be part of the budget.
Okay, so when we were talking, our friend over here who had a lot of questions, when he was asking about the budget and how this goes, what is it that we're tasked with right now? We're just saying, yes, we want this to go to referendum.
Yep, I think what you're going to be tasked with at one of your next agenda item 3 is that what you're really doing according to this agenda is you're setting a budget for this committee. That's what you're basically doing. You're setting a budget for this committee. You're going to say, first of all, you're going to say, are we going to use the ARPA funds? Well, you're going to say, this is what the budget is based on what they said. So the committee recommended they want the budget to be 16.4 or whatever that number was. The council here is going to say, yay or nay, is that the budget they want? After they say yay or nay to that, they could reduce it, they could make it higher, they could say, okay. Then the next thing you guys are going to say is that, okay, well, are we going to use any of our ARPA funds for that? And we're going to say we're going to use $7 million in ARPA funds. So that means that this 16.5 project, if you use all 7, is maybe a $9 million project. So then that would be what the project is. The committee is going to continue to design. They're going to continue to sharpen their pencil. They're going to get more information about the site plan. All of that's going to happen. And then if it was going at the budget time, the regular budget time, when you guys are doing your budget, the committee is going to come back, give another presentation, and the council is going to set a separate item that says, this project's going to go to a referendum, and this is the cost.
And that'll be a separate line item on the referendum.
On the referendum.
Got it. In April, if we choose to.
Right, and that's not a project budget anymore. That is the number. And so the point is that the council, this is just their budget, and when it's all said and done in a couple of months, if the committee can come up with savings, that number could come down. That number it could go up, the council could, but it could come down. And so you're setting a project budget, and then in March and April, when you send it, that's when you're sending it to referendum, and that's the dollar amount you'd see on the ballot.
Thanks for the education.
No problem.
Kathy, what's so the blackout period for that referendum on 1928? It's 30 days, you said?
No, it's going to be, I think it's about 2 weeks. So it's, I think if I remember, it'll be the Monday in April, the first Monday in April is your town council meeting.
Yeah.
At that time, that's when you have the town council's budget. And then at that time, you have to have your referendum questions ready. So if you had a fire truck, a 1928 building, and that, from that point is the blackout period. And then from then, like 2 weeks later, you'd have the annual town meeting. And how it would work is you'd have the annual town meeting on the budget, still the same annual town meeting, but then you talk about the 1928, you could talk about a fire truck, if a fire truck was on there, and then from the annual town meeting, like, it's like, 10 days on that Thursday. So I think it comes at the beginning of April, and then by, I think the third week of April is the referendum. All of that period is the blackout period.
Yeah, because I think what Johnny was saying, it would be great to have as much information on the budget, the overall budget, before making decisions on this. But then, to your point, if we wait too long, then we're going to feel like we're not giving the town enough information. But really, the goal is to have more information to make a better decision and not keep things from people. So it's just a tough spot.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And again, we'll have this conversation. We have, in many, many times throughout town, we have not set a budget for the committee. We have not done that. But what has happened, and at the former high school project, it became, I think, some people realized that why isn't the council setting a budget for a project? And then the project was so high, in quote, in people's minds, or it wasn't communicated enough. So we're trying to kind of work this one towards the same thing. And the other important factor here is those ARPA funds and getting out if the council's going to use it, even though the project cost is 16.5, give or take, the actual cost to the taxpayer is $7 million less than that. And that makes a big difference. And we should really be communicating that out there as sooner rather than later.
Just a quick clarification on something that I thought I heard. I just want to make sure I heard it correct. And that is the buffer that we pushed out into the parking lot of the high school. It just looks like it's covering up some parking spaces that may have been there before. So are we actually losing those parking spaces for the school, or that's just was a clarification.
Yeah, yes, of course. So if you were to look at the high school site plan that was bid as part of the high school project, there was a row of parking right here.
Yeah.
And then there was a parking lot actually where the 28 parking lot is sitting that was serving the tennis courts.
Okay.
So we removed those, and that has all been supplemented in this gray bar at the top.
Oh, that's where they went.
And that's a one-to-one in
Oh,
terms of
okay.
the number of parking spaces that were in the high school project.
Thank you. It just looked like
You're
they were
welcome.
gone. I didn't realize you added them up there. Thank you. That was my question. Oh, and Kathy, a question. Is this where we talk about, my question for us is, have we looked at other sources of funding, grants for iconic or historic buildings, so we don't have to use ARPA funds?
Joe? I think we'll get into that with the
That later.
financial part,
Sure,
because we're
no
going to talk
worries.
finance in a minute.
Finance, yeah, but just a general question. It's not considered a historic building, so we haven't been able to look at that. But we are looking at some different things for Eversource and some different grant funding through that.
Thank you.
Have a question?
Joe, yeah?
Kathy, can you just go into a little bit? Obviously, if it does go through, we are always fighting for space. What's lacking for probate? You know, that's always an issue for us, how it needs to grow since it involves several other towns. The movement possibly of the food bank because of the lack of space to bring it here, and what issues we're dealing with the Staples House, since Human Services deals with, basically everyone with disability, how they're always needing, a proper space to have their meetings, meet their clients, accessibility for them
Right.
by bringing them over here.
Yep. Did a pretty good job summing that up for me.
I'll just switch seats over here.
Well, yes, Joe, that is correct. Thank you.
All right, good.
Yeah, so social services, there's a couple of things that you described. They're in the red house next door. It's not handicap accessible. It's not that big. They have a lot of clientele. We think that that would be a nice match that would come into the town hall annex. What's also nice about it is it's just existing office space, so they just move in. It's not like you have to renovate to change things for them. And they also deal with some of the different things that are used in this council chambers. So that's really positive. The food bank is desperate for space. So if you have the food bank in here, you have the social services department with some of the things that they do with the clientele that they have. The probate could expand there. And the other thing is again, just general, what the committee's talked about is this kind of business incubator space. And if someone wants to use, like for instance, we were talking about potentially like the development wing office. If that was just completely cleared out, that's like a good field of where someone could rent that space, someone could use that space, and just to do anything, office space. There's tons of different ideas that Rose Ponte has that could be used for that. But again, it does also come back to that, again, we keep on saying it, the storage space and things like that we need. We are desperate for that. We never have enough of that space. So I think this building will be using this space like instantaneously. It's, and then, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so basically, get everything going. This is not going to be an empty building by moving our current departments up to the 1920. It's going to be filled in, bringing everybody to one campus, closing your satellite offices down, and just bring them in.
Bring them
walking
here.
Distance of everybody.
Right, exactly. And one of the things that they did talk about, and just bring it up because a question did come up, is that, this is a beautiful council chambers. We're on the same campus. We have a new conference room outside. This is why we want it to be the town hall annex, is because we want to still use this space, and it's all on the same campus. The judge and the probate office can use this. The council's going to use this. The TPZ. We move, everything's with the technology. It's all there, and so this is, we are again always looking for space and for the public, and so the space outside that we just built is a beautiful space. We still think we're going to be using that space, or the public will be able to use that space more, and this will still be our council chambers, and the judge will also be having to be able to use it more often, and we're not going to be fighting, and that's going to be a benefit too. And the committee didn't see any need of building a council chambers in that building or other space when this is perfectly good space, and we like it, and has great technology in it too.
Thank you.
I got one more.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Chris, I don't know if you can speak to this, but there's been some questions about, because there is a lot going on in town, we have a high school and there's a lot of other projects and things like that have been considered. Is there any way in the construction of the high school, this has to be done in conjunction with the construction of the high school, right? We can't, quote unquote, mothball 1928 and kick the can down the road and do it 5, 7, 8, 9 years from now, right? It's sort of something, because we're taking off walls, it's now or never, correct?
It's most cost effective now. You can do anything. It's just how much money are you willing to throw at it?
Yeah. Would your opinion be that it would just cost more to do something like that?
Yes, it would cost. We don't have those numbers. We haven't been asked to develop those numbers. But if you were to demo the high school and leave this portion of the building and not touch it again for a couple years, there would be a lot of work that needs to be done just to have it be able to be sitting there secure, resistant to the weather.
A cost associated with leaving it alone and
Right.
then going back in to start the project again and whatever else. Okay, just want to make sure we knew that.
Right.
So you can't just wrap those big blue tarps around the whole thing and duct tape?
Rubber band.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay.
And then any of the economies of scale of the site work and everything like that, we'd probably miss the boat on all that too.
Right, yeah, anything that we could double up on.
Yeah.
You have to use synergies in a sentence now, Kathy.
Yeah.
So I just want to circle back to a couple of things. One, I think that Keith brought up, the timing of it, and it was, the question was asked earlier about the timing and, are we rushing this? I think the first answer is just that. Trying to mothball this building would be very costly. We would lose the synergies of the same space there if we did that. And we wouldn't be able to use the ARPA money because it would be beyond that point. So those are, I think, some of the reasons for discussing this right now rather than later. A few other questions that came up earlier on, and I thought you mentioned it. It was asked, is insulation included in this project? It sounded like I heard you say insulation earlier on.
Correct.
So we're re-insulating this entire building. The exterior walls is getting an R factor of what added to it? I forget what you said there.
It's 2.5 inches roughly of spray foam, so it's going to be between an R12 and an R15.
Okay, so we're adding significant amounts of insulation. Also, I noticed some line items on here because one of the questions was about inflation, escalation, costs. I see a number of items here. Would that be the contingencies, the escalation, and I see, what's the other one? Owner's contingency, would those kind of cover those items?
We believe so, yes.
Okay. And that's a pretty big percentage from what I see. You got 10, 6, and another 5, so 21, the mathematician next to me just told me. Thank you. And let's see. The other question had to do with an owner's rep. Is that something we've discussed, or what are we talking about in that situation?
It was discussed at the building committee level. If I were to go back 5 years in time, it would be a rarity to see an owner's rep on a project, especially a general contractor project. It is something towns are leaning towards more often these days. There's an owner's rep CSG on the high school project. Those are services that architects and engineers used to provide and still do provide. When asked, we often tell our clients on this scale project, it's not necessary. It's really up to the town. If you have the staff to handle the paperwork side, more importantly than anything, as the architect and engineer of record, we still represent you in terms of enforcing the contract with the contractor, boots on the ground, reviewing items in construction. So by no means necessary. And it's hard to say what percentage of projects use an owner's rep these days, but it's certainly not all of them, and it's certainly not none of them.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to kind of the timing of it, and this is more of a general comment, I guess, or question for the council. First off, is, clearly we're well aware that a project of this size, it's an incredibly difficult time to be considering it. We knew we would be considering this project when we first discussed the high school project. We'll get into some of the numbers when Joe gets up in a couple of minutes. The added challenge this year, as was mentioned, is the reval, and we're dealing with whatever we're going to deal with on the balance between residential and commercial, and how that's affecting everyone's taxes. So that makes all of this a little more difficult. With all of that in mind, I'd like to get an idea from this 16.6 million, what this project would look like if that number were reduced, because whatever we're setting here tonight, and keep in mind the number we set tonight is not necessarily going to be the same number that we go to referendum with, but it's setting the charge really for this committee to say, hey, do everything you can to do the project that fits these numbers. This discussion today is the project presented to us that we've just seen this very nice presentation about. Is this the project we are looking to fund right now? If we were to say, hey, what would this project look like if it were a $15 million project or a $14 million project, is that something you can give us some kind of idea about?
I can say that outside of the potential for site development savings, if that's tied into the high school project, the low-hanging fruit has been picked on this project. You're making compromises if we're taking big chunks out of the budget. One item that was discussed is replacement of all the windows at about, I think it was $450,000. That's an item that could be removed from the project, not recommended. We're trying to be cost conscious with our design, but also conscious of energy efficiencies and your operating and maintenance costs into the future. So even adding the insulation to the exterior walls was first proposed as an alternate to the building committee, and we discussed the pros and cons of doing that now at the added cost to the project versus having a very uninsulated building and what that means for your mechanical systems and operational costs down the road. So I don't think there's any simple item to say, if we remove this, we can bring this down to a $15 million project. I think it would be really, really hard decisions that would need to be made to get to that number.
The next, I guess, question I would have is, are there items on here, and this is something we dealt with, the high school building committee had many discussions and conversations about, are there items, if they were cut out of this project now, reducing the cost, that could be added in at a later date? Insulation clearly isn't one of them. You're not going to go back into a building and say, okay, now we're going to gut everything, re-insulate all the exterior walls. Windows, to me, would be something that could be a later date potential project. It doesn't mean it's as efficient, and it means it could cost more at a later date, but there are items that you would consider something that if it were done at some time in the future, it wouldn't affect the project today?
Perhaps some of the exterior repairs, like repairing the stucco finish around the base of the building. If you look at the image, here the colored image, it's that beige section at the ground floor. It's really cosmetic. There's no structural concerns of not repairing that area now. And in addition to that, some brick repointing of these faces that we're looking at now, not the restoration of the brick on the back sides of the building where we're peeling the high school away. That needs to be addressed now, but perhaps some of those cosmetic items, including potentially the shingle roof and the cupola, I suppose, could be examined in a little more detail to see what the true life expectancy is of those systems, and if waiting, I'm not sure how long we're talking, but whatever X number of years that is, if it could negatively impact you by waiting for those years. So I don't think anything on the interior of the building, but just perhaps some of the more minor cosmetic items of the exterior could be put off if push came to shove.
And furniture. You could have empty conference rooms.
Okay.
Yeah. You could bring old
And
furniture up.
obviously, I'm well aware that the risk of doing any of those things is they never get done. I mean, we've seen that in many past projects throughout the town. We say we'll try this next year, or we see that in the high school that we have now. People said we're not going to do what we should be doing, and we added another wing, and we added another wing, and we added another wing, and we're in the situation we are right now. So I just want to make sure we're really looking at all our options right now, because when we're listening to Joe in a couple of minutes, we'll get some idea of the overall impact and how this size project is going to affect this budget we're working on right now, but budgets in years to come with the bonding we're doing. So are there any other questions for Chris? Brian, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Brian.
Sure.
Yeah, just one more question, kind of circling back to the discussion, Joe and Kathy talking about the satellite offices that would close as those departments move into this new building. Has there been discussion on what the plans are for those satellite offices when they close? Could they possibly be rented out and potentially generate some revenue for the town, or would they be repurposed for some other use?
Well, we've been talking a little bit, so recreation is in the depot place, which is way too small for them, and so education is in there already, so that they would just have more room. So the recreation is spread out, but the person that's there, they'd be brought in. The other building would be the Staples House, the red building here, which I think is a building that could be used for the public on certain things. So we haven't really come up with a plan for that building. It's not handicap accessible, but there are some different things I think that we could look at our survey and maybe use for the public. It is a beautiful building, but it does need, I mean, it's renovated, meaning it has new carpet and it's painted, but it's, other than that, I'm sure you've been in it. And then everything else is really, we're all moving from here up to there.
Okay, thank you, Kathy.
The Depot Place answer is that's either going to be an ice cream parlor or a coffee shop. Brian?
Just a quick question. One of the questions that we asked a while back in relationship to the building, I don't know if you can answer this, but the question was maintenance. What is it going to cost on an annual basis to maintain this building in addition to what we're doing in town?
I think we have to get
Just
those numbers
roughly.
firmed up.
Correct.
Yeah, we could probably get that. I mean, it's a bigger building. We could probably, to analyze
I'm
it.
sure we could run some square foot numbers with our engineers based on what we're proposing for systems and get a ballpark for you, but we have not done that to date.
Just one of the questions that we asked a while back, and it just, as we were talking about the windows, it made me think of that.
Anything else for Chris? Great, thank you very much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just gonna hit the yellow mark.
Okay.
You just call on Joe.
Yep. Joe Swetke, item 2, financial forecast update.
Thank you.
What's,
Joe, is this different than the one we have?
I don't know what you have.
Oh, they gave us one with the yellow highlights, so it is different. We have yellow highlights on ours.
Oh, I think it's just it's a Xerox copy without the highlighting.
Here, just pass them down, everybody gets to.
I printed that one out, Joe.
You have? Yeah, you're giving us, all right.
Just make sure all the numbers are the same.
You're passing around a revised forecast or an updated forecast. It should say on it, the title should be Financial Forecast with FHS at 101.7 million, 1928 building at 9.0 million, and then in parentheses, 20 years.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Okay.
Uh-huh. We beat you to it.
Yeah, I guess so. And it should have a date from the quarter 1/24/23.
Yes.
What I was asked to do is to update the financial forecast that I presented to you in October, and based on what has transpired since October. In October, I kind of gave you a little bit of a gloomy picture as to the financial situation in general, although the situation with the high school wasn't gloomy, other than the fact they needed additional funds. A couple of things I'd like to talk about first. On the high school project, this has an impact on this. Two things. Since that October meeting, interest rates on municipal bonds have dropped pretty significantly. Not to the point where we were a year ago, but they have dropped down. I think at that point we're looking in the 4s, now we're looking in the high 3s. So the rates have been going in the right direction in terms of interest rates. And I did reflect some of that change in these numbers. So when we go through some of these numbers, you'll see that some of the debt service numbers for the high school are lower because we're projecting lower interest rates on those. The other thing is, obviously we all know the $9 million additional appropriation passed, and this forecast assumes that $9.9 million will actually receive the benefit of the 30% reimbursement rate from the state of Connecticut. So, and that's a key point in this. So we are expecting additional state reimbursement on that. Basically what that means for the high school project is now the net municipal cost, if you will, or bonding projection, instead of being $105 million, I reduced it to $101.7 million. So basically about $4 million less, a little less, just $4.3 million less than what we had originally talked about bonding in the first place. So now we're looking at bonding at $100,700,000. And that's a key factor because it does reduce by $4 million what we're going to bond over the life of the high school project over the next 3 years. So it changes some of those numbers. And I highlighted that if you look at the it's shaded, I guess in the one you had, it was highlighted, but it's shaded here, I said the high school issue, the existing issue that we did, plus the additional high school issues. Now we're talking about issuing $64.5 million. And so those numbers going across, if you compared them to the previous forecast, the initial numbers at the beginning are higher, slightly higher, but as you go out into future years, the numbers actually go lower. So that actually helps us in the long run. And I also built into this the 1928 building at a $9 million cost. I'm assuming you're going to use ARPA funds and that you would need $9 million in bonding. So if your project's $16.5 million, I'm probably a little short, but I figured you would use ARPA funding and you'd only have to bond $9 million. So this forecast looks at $9 million. Something that should, other than that, this forecast is pretty much the same. So the only thing that really changed was the debt service numbers, both for the high school and for the 1928 building. A couple of things, just to point out answer some of the questions that came up. The 1928 building project will not impact your decisions on what you do on the budget for next year. The 1928 building, if I understand the timeline correctly, if you start on this building in 2024, I'm assuming the summer of 2024 when demolitions should start on the high school project. The smart thing to do, and what I would do, if you use the ARPA funding would go first. Okay, you have to use it by 2026. You don't have to bond. The money's sitting here. It's earning interest for us right now. But at the same time, I'd rather not earn interest and not have to pay interest. The ARPA funds would be used first on this project. So basically through 2024 into 2025, you would be using the ARPA funds. So you would not need to bond for this project until 2025 at the earliest, assuming everything stays on timeline. The other thing about this is because of the size of this project, and because you're bonding $9 million, more than likely we would not bond this money until the project. I'm assuming this is a one-year project. I don't know if you guys can tell me whether it's not or not. So if you start in 2024, you're done in 2025. Based on that, more than likely what would happen is we would bond late in 2025. We're probably talking either the summer, possibly the fall of 2025. So your debt actually would not go into place until 25, 26. That's when you start to see debt service. And that's what I built into this project. So if you look into column 25, 26, and you look at the line 1928 building, which is right there, Devin's got the cursor on it. That would be your first debt payment if under this forecast, and that would be $70,000. Okay, basically what is going to happen in 25, 26 is you're going to have one interest payment. And what's going to happen is the way bonding is going right now, the way borrowing is going right now, you would get a 4% interest rate, maybe a 4.25% interest rate, but you're also going to get a premium back on that bond issue. And I've explained this before to the council. That premium would go to offset some of that interest cost. So in that first year, in 25, 26, chances are your bonding costs, your debt service costs will be around $70,000. And that would mean actually bonding the full $9 million all at once. I wouldn't break it up into portions. It would go all at once. So, and then in 26, 27, you would start to see, if you could just go to the next page, Kevin. Slide down. So in 26, 27, that's where you see the larger impact of the bonding, and that's $682,000. That would be your debt service in that year. Your highest debt service would be in 28, 29, and that's when you'd be almost at $800,000. And then it would start to slowly go down after that. So that's what your debt service would look like, your borrowing of $9 million for this project. It would start to hit in 25, 26. Your full impact would be in 28, 29. It would build up, it would peak in 28, 29, and then it would start to drop off again. So the question came up, reval. This will impact the reval, believe it or not, because when this does hit in full, you're going to be in another reval. We have to reval under the state law, under state OPM's regulations. The town of Farmington has to reval every 4 years. So 4 years from now, you'll be you're doing another reval. So we're figure in 23, 24, 26, 27, you'll be looking at another, I'm sorry, 27, 28, you'll be looking at another reval as this debt falls on. So you will have a consideration on that at that point in time. It will not impact 23, 24. Okay? So at least the 1928 building debt service will not impact 28, 24. So what I'd like to do is just go to the next slide. There's a lot of numbers here, and I could go through all of them. And if you have questions, I'll be more than happy to. I went out the full forecast. But I'd like to show you what the net effect is of basically what you're doing. You're swapping $4 million from a high school project to $4 million to a 1928 building. I'm sorry, I neglected to say. In the original forecast, I did say I did build in $5 million for the 1928 building. So that original forecast you saw in October had $5 million appropriated and had debt service for the 1928 building. So basically what you're doing is you're adding $4 million in debt service for the 1928 building. You're taking $4 million off of the high school project. What it does, Devin, if you could just go to that other. So, and you have this in your packet there. Basically, the dollar change. Okay. Can you go to the first one, the debt increase? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Basically, by year, the October forecast, it shows you debt service, what the projected debt service was in total. This is existing debt, projected debt based on the capital budget, projected debt based on the high school, projected debt based on the 1928 building. So, based on this new forecast, next year our debt service will be higher, and it has nothing to do with 1928 building. It has to do with the high school project and how we would bond for the high school project. You're looking at almost $70,000 extra. However, in 24-25, your debt service from the original forecast is down almost $600,000, and that's by the fact that you're not going to be bonding that $4 million for the high school project. Also, consideration that there is less interest costs because the rates are coming down. That number gets bigger in 25-26. It's almost $658,000, and then you have some savings, additional savings. When it starts to build up is in 28-29, and that's when the 1928 building, the full effect of the debt service comes on. So the debt service actually will be higher than what we originally forecasted that year, and the following years out, you'll see it 29-30 and 30-31, and I believe 31-32. And if I were to carry this out another 5 years, you would actually see that savings in that total savings of 339 would go away. Basically, as the debt service falls off on the high school project and the debt service is on the 1928 building, what this is going to end up doing, it's going to netting out, other than the fact that you're going to have an interest savings, that 339 would get smaller and smaller each year. So basically what you've done is you swapped out. You've taken $4 million from one project and you've put it to another project. And that's really what the forecast does. If you go to the next tab, the tax rate. So again, these are tax rate numbers. On the October forecast, October forecast, that was the projected mill increase each year, each fiscal year, based on the high school, based on the October forecast. As you can see, on the January forecast, again, it's going to be up slightly, 0.02 of a mill, and then it goes down. After that, you're going to see some decreases, and then you'll start to see it go back up again as the the 1928 building comes on. You do have 1 year in there that's flat. That's the reval year. So the reval absorbs the debt service that year. But the rest of those years, you will see, and it's not really anything significant. And I don't think I totaled that one. If you just slide down. Yep. So the net difference between the two is 0.06 mils difference. So it basically washes out. There is no additional tax impact by adding the 1928 building, again, because there's a swap out of the $4 million. And on the last tab, It just shows the dollars. And then if you go down to the bottom, you're going to see a savings. You're going to see a difference of $17. Savings basically is $17, and that's actually the interest rate savings. It's a result of savings because of the interest rate forecast change. So that's really what the financial impact of this project. It's really, based on the original forecast in October, it's really a net impact overall.
Joe, one of the things on your forecast, it does talk about, and I know everyone's always interested in about what the tax impact would be, but one of the things that our committee's going to be interested in, and you didn't separate it out, but I think we talked about it. Could you give a ballpark that if it was a standalone project, what this would be on the taxes?
Yeah, I haven't run those numbers, so I'm a little hesitant to say, but it's probably going to be, I mean, you're probably looking at 0.2, 0.02 mils.
And what does that equal in dollars?
Yeah, I really hesitate to say at this point. I'd rather prefer to run the numbers before I say that, before I commit to that number.
Okay.
But it's probably, it's probably less than $50 a year.
Okay.
So.
All right, so that would be something, obviously, that we're going to have to, we'd like to run and have that information in our communications material.
Right. So that's really what the forecast looks like at this point. We will get, I know there's a lot of talk about reval and the shift and everything else. My assessor's still here tonight. He's working on it, he's crunching the numbers, and I hope to have numbers either by the end, well, I have to have numbers by next Tuesday. He's committed to, he didn't want an extension. He could have asked for an extension to February 28th. He has indicated he did not want the extension. He'd get the numbers to us by the 31st, but I'm pretty certain that I'll either have numbers Friday or Monday from him on that. Once I do get those numbers, I could build it into the projection for 23, 24 and see how it looks. I hesitate to do that, and I know I've been criticized. There's been some criticism from the public on doing that, because that would pretty much distort a lot of this, what the impact on the debt service that you're seeing. And what we're trying to do is isolate the debt service cost in these forecasts and the impact of specific projects on the forecast. So you are going to see, even with factoring some increase in groundless in the 23-24, I've pointed this out before. You're still looking at a 5.2% tax increase regardless of reval. So just based on the debt service alone for the high school project, based on your traditional increases for education in the town and for your capital budget, you're looking at a 5.2% increase, not considering or not factoring in reval. And that hasn't changed from my October forecast.
Okay, questions for Joe?
And it doesn't directly relate to 1928, but I just recall from the initial high school discussions that you did a really good job of forecasting that rates were about to go up, and you jumped on bonding extra in that initial year that we bonded for. So with rates now coming lower than maybe we thought they would be, is there plans to do more of that now, or are you projecting they're going to keep going down, or I know that's a moving target?
That's an interesting question, and it's actually something you relate to, or you relate to everything that's going on in the world. And just to give it an analogy, I guess, we just went out to bid for electricity rates, and electricity rates are backing off because of the warm winter. But what they're saying is that if I take a one-year commitment, my rate is.
I just had the same thing in my business. You take a one-year commitment, you can do well.
It's just the opposite. The one-year commitment is very high.
Yeah.
A two-year commitment was in the middle, and a three-year commitment was very good. So that starts to raise the question: well, why are they willing to take a risk on a three-year commitment?
Yeah.
They must know something I don't know, that those rates are going to go down further.
Yeah.
So, do you lock in the higher rate now with the hopes that the lower rate's going to come later on? My philosophy on the bonding right now, or my strategy on the bonding right now, is to actually try to bond as little as possible and hopefully that the rates will back off even further over the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, again, we're looking at something, we're talking about doing a bond issue in '25, and it's 3 years or 2 years from now. And if you told me a year ago that rates would have peaked over 4.5% at this point, I would tell you, no way. So my guess is that rates are going to go back down. So I'm trying to use a strategy of pushing off as much as possible. A lot of it, but regardless of that, a lot of this is driven by cash flow, especially on a high school project, which is $145 million. Even though you're getting some of that money back from the state, you're pushing out a lot of money each month. And we don't have that kind of money just sitting around that we could. I could advance funds. I mean, we have an $18 million fund balance. It's easy to advance funds for a $9 million project with an $18 million fund balance. It's just idle cash sitting there that I could advance to pay the project until we borrow. I can't do that with a high school project.
Yeah.
So I have to bond, when I need cash. And the goal right now is to bond as late as possible, just with the hope that rates will continue to decline.
Okay.
And the other option with that, and I always tell people, is I think I made my mark here in town back in the early 2010s, whatever it is, when I refinanced all the town's debt. And that option will be available in the future to whoever follows me in this job. They'll be able 7, 8 years from now to, 9 years from now to refinance.
You're not going anywhere.
I was going to say, Joe,
now.
come on.
I hate to tell you, Kathy, but if I'm still here 8 years from now, I've done some seriously poor retirement planning. But yes, it basically, at some point, even if we did have a higher interest rate, 7, 8 years, 9 years from now, that money, if rates go down again, could be refinanced, and the town could realize the savings at that point. So we're always looking for the right time to borrow, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah.
And we'll, hopefully, one of the nice things about the reason why debt was going, or interest rates are going down right now, is nobody's borrowing. So it's like, there's all of a sudden nobody wanted your debt. Nobody was issuing debt, and now everybody wants your debt. So they're willing to pay for it now. But again, it's changed. It's not the way it used to be. I was talking to a financial advisor the other day, and he said to me he got fired from a job. A town fired him because he forecasted a certain interest rate. And they got that interest rate. But the problem is the coupons were all 4% and 5%. What happened was they got a large premium up front, which drove down the interest rate. So, they're still going to pay a 5% coupon each year, but they were given money to help offset that 5%. And how you use that money you get back determines whether you do get a true interest, lower interest rate or not.
Yeah.
Other questions for Joe?
Happy retirement?
Not a question.
Hawaii.
No questions.
No questions for Joe? Okay, I do. All right, so obviously, the first thing from our highlighted sheet that jumps out, we're looking at this basically extending out the debt right now. So versus the original proposal, and of course, back when we passed our first high school referendum, it was $110 million we were going to bond. So that's come down significantly to that 101 point whatever that you're talking about now. In your original forecast, you were already assuming $5 million bonded for the 1928 building, and an abundance of caution. So now we're just adding $4 million more. These numbers look surprisingly good compared to what you were looking at before. I know interest rates are a good plus. What did we get, those first two bonding issues that we did, what was the rate on those?
Well, we did one high school rate, and that was 2.38. And actually, the one we did before that was under 2. So, I mean, those days are gone for now.
Yep.
That's something that is not you're not going to see that for a while. We'll probably see, I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I'd probably, or actually, what I'm banking on is you're probably going to see interest rates 3 years from now around 310, 305, 310. So right now, you're in the 375 to 395 range.
So the first two bondings, the 37.2, were averaging around just over 2%,
2.38.
2.38%. So that's roughly, well, not roughly, it's a little more than a third of what we're going to bond for the whole high school. We've got at 2.38. So that helps all these numbers significantly. The numbers that we had spoken about when we were originally talking about the high school building project, and I think Kathy was sort of asking this question, the increase due to the high school project, it would be nice to see at some point, and obviously we're not going to get it tonight, a line that just says increase due to the 1928 building, because those seem fairly minuscule. You know, when we skip that 25, 26, because there's not much of we're bonding there, but 682 being bonded in 26, 27, that's a little more than a tenth of the high school project. So the increase due to the high school is 26.35. So you're saying it's going to be like $3 or $4 that year's
more than that, but
Not going to be more than what the high school was.
no, it's going to be, I mean, if the high school is 26.35 and this is, if you called it a tenth of that, it's more than a tenth of that. So anyway, okay, so these are low numbers.
But, yeah, but the increase due to the high school, don't forget, when those numbers, they tie into everything else that takes place, okay, here. Standalone, just high school alone, I think there was another chart that we put out, and actually I think somebody in the public requested that we put it out, that showed just the high school standalone, and it is higher. It is a higher number.
Yep.
So this 20,
Yeah.
like when you see it 26.35, that was basically because debt's falling off, this was happening, that's happening, and you know, so it was everything in conjunction working together. I guess synergy. It was.
The word for this evening is synergy. Thank you, Ed.
But you could do the same thing at another time, just do the same thing, because it'd still be the same, things are going to be coming off and everything like that.
And that's the other added benefit to those stretching this out. We've got other debt coming off the rolls, and the debt service, the non-high school debt service, just kind of to clarify for those watching at home, that's our forecast of debt going forward as well. So we're assuming the roads, we're assuming things like that?
Right. It's, what it does is it takes the existing debt, what's out there right now, which includes, and I should, and this is totally aside, but and this is probably kudos to Russ Arnold. People seem to forget, we had a $67 million project here in town, which at that time was our largest project. And we had an engineering firm, and Russ Arnold and his staff managed that project without an owner's rep. So, you know, I don't want to give Russ more work, but you know, we do have experience with that. But at any rate, that includes the debt service on that project, on the $67 million treatment plant project. It includes all existing debt that we have, and then any future debt that we're projecting. Based on the capital budget, the most recently adopted capital budget, which includes roads, includes fire trucks, and actually includes $3.5 million, which I hear is not enough, but it does include $3.5 million for ventilation in the elementary schools. So there is money built into that existing, into that line that says debt service non-high school, I guess the way. That line does include future bonding for various projects.
Okay. Any other questions for Joe? Seeing none, thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Appreciate that. Item D4.
We're on D3, yeah.
D3, right?
D3.
Oh, yeah, D3, sorry about that.
Municipal costs.
Yeah, so you could either put
All right. I'd like to make a motion to set the net municipal cost for the 1928 building at $9 million.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Now is our time for discussion on this number.
You want me to just briefly go
Go
through?
ahead,
Yeah,
please do.
so most of it was in the building committee, I mean, in the presentation. So that's the building committee's recommendation. They did 16,597,919. The building committee has reviewed the cost. And I think it's important to note that the building committee expects that the cost estimates associated with the site plan will be less than the estimate because the scope will be overlaps between them. So that is important to note. We talked about the ARPA funds already. One of the things I do want to note is that we do have a remaining balance of $7,436,000. I am recommending if we do use the ARPA funds, we use $7 million of that and we leave the $436,992, and we use that money for the town's matching steep grant requirement for the new pickleball and splash park at Westwoods Golf Course. If you remember, we got a state grant for $500,000 to do pickleball courts and a splash park at Westwoods. We could use our funds for that $436,992 for our portion of that. If the council chooses not to do that, you will have $436,992 in the upcoming capital budget. And as you know, our capital budgets are not that large, so an expenditure of close to $500,000 will significantly affect the other capital projects. But I think this is a good match that we use all federal dollars and state dollars for our new splash park and pickleball park. And courts. And that's it for me. Oh, and I am recommending that we go to the referendum at the budget time. And as I kind of discussed earlier, I mean, it's obviously a council decision, but I think that it's going to get very convoluted because if we're ready to go, all of these numbers and all of these forecasts are going to be right there, and people are going to ask about it, and they're going to ask about what the impact is, and it's going to get, I think, convoluted into our own budget. But again, I think that if the council wanted to push off another referendum vote to June, they could do that, but it does seem like it would be a good timing to do it all at the same time. But that's, again, a council choice. And that's it.
Okay. Questions?
So if I hear that correctly, 7 million of ARPA funds, 9 million cost for 16 million total, not the 16,597 that's on the page.
That's what Joey just did, yes.
Okay.
With the thought that the $5,997,000 would be savings, hopefully, in the site plan type of work, that type of, and other savings if we can find them.
Okay, questions or comments? Keith?
So, my general opinion on this from the get-go has been that I like the 1928 building for all the historical reasons. I think there's a lot of things that make sense with creating the space between various town activities. I know people are really looking for more rec space for sports and things like that in town, so I think this serves a lot of needs. However, I also do know that there's just a lot going on, and I don't like the perception that essentially anything that comes along, the council is going to just rubber stamp. And we just asked for $9.7 million a couple months ago for the high school. It's a very similar figure, and so while I as a taxpayer am in favor of it, as a steward of taxpayer money, I really think that there's some of the stuff that we really have to look at. Just things that were mentioned that could save money. And I'm not saying that these are all great ideas, but we could wait on windows. He mentioned insulation was an ad alternate at one point. The stucco base was purely cosmetic. Some of the brick repointing. The shingle roof and the cupola could wait. Russ is the owner's rep. That would save some money. And then
that's already in there.
That's a part of site plan overlaps and all that stuff too. Okay. So those are just areas that we could save money. But then you also get into $7 million cost after ARPA versus a $9 million cost after ARPA. Does it make sense to try to go, and that's the difficult decision that we make. But for me, I would try to be as tight with it as possible. I like the idea of doing the project. I like the idea of creating this space and having this extra, area for all the town services. But I do think that it's a lot to ask the town to come back for more money. I also think that just based on just commentary that I heard about the last referendum, I do think we should try to put it on with the budget if possible. I don't think people like coming out for a budget vote and then being asked to come out 2 months later for a separate vote. I think getting, there was comment from some of the elderly community that's it's kind of a bear to get out and get out to vote, wait in line, things like that. And I think putting it all together would be our best course if we can.
Ed?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people in town see the building as either a landmark or part of our history and part of our culture. I like the use of the different use that of the space for town needs, town space needs that we know are things that we do have to address. I'm open to potentially looking at. So I guess what are you proposing, Keith, with like some of the comments you were making is holding off on some of the exterior modifications?
I don't know. I think that the charge would be to have a budget that we send. I mean, we're sending the budget back to the building committee, right? We're saying, this is your budget. Can you make it work? Like, can you, right? I mean, that's essentially what we're doing right now. We're creating a budget to send back to the 1928 committee.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a couple of things, right? It's a budget, and I think that it's a given that the building committee, and Peter's here, is going to be looking at various savings and things of that nature. And I think that making a cut of $597,000, you've sliced quite a bit in the already on that. I think we can continue to try to get the prices down lower. What you've described on some of those other things is significantly changing the plan, but I think we would have prices and we'd be ready to go. You'd have more information available at the budget time, and that if for some reason the budget has really gone haywire, the committee at that time could say, there's nothing to say, okay, well, we're going to have to put out the windows, we're going to have to put off this, and to lower it.
In the same sense, we could also say, interest rates came down. We're better here. We can add the windows. Let's add the stucco. Let's do the cupola right now. Right?
And
so to me, to your point, I don't have a firm number to throw back. I mean, we can all figure that out now. My hope is that we can give them a number that, unfortunately for the committee, creates some work, and we're really trying to be as tight as possible with it.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I just think that we have to be careful with is that we will be tight, but anything like more than a little bit more on this 6.5 or 6.6, whatever it is.
Taking $500,000 off it with Joe's.
Right. Then in our communication, it gets convoluted. Then in the communication, we're saying, our budget is 16 million, but basically there's a chance if you said, let's get us down to 15.5. We're really not doing that without now cutting windows and doing that thing. And then we're communicating that out, which is probably not a great thing. With with the charge of more like, listen, this is your 16 is your charge, but we're looking for you to make as many savings as you possibly can. And as the design keeps on going and the site work does, and that when we come back during, the budget time, and with Joey being your liaison, we can let you know that way. I just get worried about communicating that we're doing a building with no windows or something along those lines.
Not no windows, with the existing windows.
Existing windows.
So it could be a pipe dream, but coming into it, Go ahead. Sorry, Joe, go ahead, Johnny.
Taking a little.
Well, hold on before you go. Ed, were you done?
Yeah, I'm all set.
Okay.
So one last comment, I guess. So the 16 million likely would include more than just the savings on, we don't have a number yet on that with the site work, but likely would include potentially maybe some of these other things that Keith brought up. And the committee could potentially come in lower than that 16 million as they were also kind of instructing them to look at.
Right. I see the savings on the site work. I'm not sure if we're going to see more savings than what we just cut out potentially with Joey. I see savings potentially when we work with Eversource for some of the things that go along with that. I see savings just because maybe some savings when we've designed that there could potentially, but as Chris and Russ have said, all the low-hanging fruit is pretty much gone. But I think you could see some savings with that. But I think the big ticket items are not going to be, not there.
Right, and since it was my comment about some items that could be deferred, I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that that's what it was. If you don't do the stucco or the cupola now, those are deferred items. It doesn't mean they can't be done ever. It would be in the very near future. I was just trying to respond to
Yeah.
what are some items that don't 100% need to be done right
We
now.
understand that's not your recommendation, you were just
Correct.
responding to a question. Yes, thank you.
And also, like you said, though, the 9 million, if we vote upon it today, could be lower at the referendum date as we go further into
Yeah, and that's
this process.
Listen, again, the last thing I was getting, my like pipe dream coming into this was that somehow ARPA could pay for 50% or more of this project. I mean, I understand that that's not necessarily. I'm not. You know, it would lower is better, right? I'm not saying anything earth shattering. I may or may not.
Johnny?
A little bit different take on this. I feel a little bit more comfortable after hearing Joe's forecast. The big question mark was the reimbursement on the extra, going from 18.93 to 30% of the high school. That was kind of a question mark the last time we sat down. That talks huge in the overall forecast. If we sit here and talk about windows and stuff, we're just diving into committee work that we shouldn't be getting into. Because at the end of the day, we're here to say we can stomach a certain amount of dollars when we look at the big picture. Can we stomach those dollars? And if we sit here and arbitrarily just bring it down by $1 million or $1.5 million, we're just pigeonholing the architect to do a inferior design, let's say, because they've had a chance to really look at this in the building committee. There is not a person on that building committee, because I know them all personally, that isn't going to look at every dollar through the process of this, because again, they're also taxpayers, they're also community people. If this dwarfs to something big, because as much as we would love to say, we'd like to see them back here in a few months saying this has gotten better, we saved this and this. The reality is that's probably not the case. If it happens, that's great. But at the end, we can stomach this, and we're sending them forward with that in mind. Those committee decisions about windows and roofing will come when they start to dial in on all those numbers. So I think we look at this more that we took a little bit out, knowing that there's already some question marks that they have aimed for, knowing there's some potential savings, but they haven't been realized at this point. And we've already captured some of that unrealized, thinking it's there, but it hasn't been substantiated. And I think I'm comfortable with that 16 million number, especially after what Joe put down or forecasted.
Thank you. Rena?
Okay, so I'm in favor of, allocating the amount of money that was requested or setting the budget at the amount that it was requested. I feel like sometimes we talk sort of in a silo and talk about things that we could cut, not looking further down the future. If we don't put in the windows that were requested, we wouldn't be doing a good enough job, and I think being responsible stewards of the money. We're just kicking the can down a little farther down the road, and we've seen what happens in town when we do things like that. The committee has requested this amount of money. I feel, after Joe's forecast, comfortable saying, okay, we understand that there may be, as Johnny said, cost savings that could come later. I think the larger issue, though, is the communication to the residents of how this will impact them and why this is beneficial for the town. And that's the piece I feel like, we need to spend more time educating, and we will be doing that. But again, it's making people understand why this is an important project for this town, and not getting it convoluted with the high school building project, and understanding that if we want to save this as a town, we all need to come together and get to the polls when we go to the referendum. And I'm also in favor of going in April during the budget and making sure that people have all of the information and make their decision. So I'm in favor of the project as it was asked.
Great. Thank you.
One more quick comment. This committee is tasked with a one-time only thing. We failed the referendum on the high school. We retooled, we went back out. if these dollars dwarf and they don't do their due diligence, every dollar they raise makes it harder to get that referendum to pass. And if it doesn't pass, we get nothing and there is no other chance. So with that lying in the background, there's going to be no room for fluff.
Brian?
Sure. I really appreciate the presentation today. I was very curious to see that, and thank you to everyone who did that work. Thank you very much. And Joe, thanks for those great numbers. That was good to see. Better numbers. But I did have a question about one thing, and that is the use of the ARPA funds. Because we've obviously presented that we have the need, and we can certainly put the high school to good use, and we can certainly put the town hall to good use as an annex for the town. The question I have is, just for consideration, eyes wide open, we have a number of things that when we're on the ad hoc committee talking about how we could use the funds, Russ mentioned a number of items we have coming up that we might consider using them on. I'm not saying we do or we don't. I'm just saying my question is, the reason I was asking, are there other alternatives to funding the preservation of the high school so we could use the ARPA funds for other projects that we have upcoming that we definitely need to do in town, just to offset taxes for the town? And I just thought that was worth the conversation.
Go ahead.
From there.
Yeah, that's
So
fine.
again, our ad hoc committee did make recommendations to the building committee, so it wasn't just Russ Arnold, it was the whole committee. And I'll just read from what the recommendation was, is that it said, since the funds had to be obligated by December 31st, the committee is recommending that the first policy decision that the town council address is whether the entire ARPA funds should be used for one large capital expenditure. And that the council at the meeting did say that. Two potential projects could be the renovation of the 1928 building or the fire department building renovations. If the town council decides to fund more than one capital project, the committee is recommending the following list for possible consideration. This is not in priority order. Paving of the rails to trails, school parking lots paving, Stonehouse improvements, Tungus Mead improvements, pump station, West Farms Mall, sidewalk project, Route 4. So those were what the committee did recommend if the town council decided not to do one large project.
Okay, so, and as a reminder, again, I said this a little earlier, when we were originally proposing the FHS building project, there was some discussion that, they've already decided the 1928 building was coming down. That was never the case. There was a placeholder in the description. At that point, the town council decided to separate the 1928 building from the high school building project because there was no question to be asked about the 1928 building if the high school building did not pass that time. Beyond the high school building project, once that did pass, we then surveyed the public to say, what do you think of this building? And 77.8% of those surveyed said, this is an important building, we want to save this building. That's why we created this committee. That's why we've been going through all these steps to see what we should do. What are the uses? We had the needs in the town hall. We had the needs throughout the town. All those indicated, yes, there is a need for this space. So now we're going to go to the design phase, which is what we've been going through now, and getting actual dollars. So the town council had made that decision again on the committee you were on, Brian, that said a major project is a great idea. We're going to focus on one project. Now, that being said, if this goes to referendum and it does not pass, we have $7 million in ARPA funds. Then the list that Kathy was talking about a moment ago, we go back to that list and say, okay, what are we going to do with these dollars? If the public now changes their mind from 77.8% of the public saying they want to save the building and they decide they don't want to save the building, then we still have that ARPA money that can still go to a number of other things. So it's not disappearing. We'll have a shorter time frame to spend it in because, as Joe mentioned earlier, we have to decide what we're going to do with that money by December of 2024 and spend it by 2026. So it can't be some long-term project that's not going to start for a long time. But we already have alternates if this does not pass. But right now, the task at hand is, do we want to put this on the referendum in April? And it seems like consensus, we'll take an actual vote in a minute, seems that's a good idea. And are we comfortable with that $9 million? So that's Do you have any questions on that in particular, Brian? Okay, great. My comments on the $9 million that we're talking about, and like a few here, it was more comforting to hear Joe's numbers and where we are right now versus where we were when we were talking in October. The impact is significantly less than we thought it would be when we were talking about this in October. I would like, and this is for consideration by the council, if we set this number tonight and we set the $9 million number, I would like to see some of the costs on the deferral, just so you're prepared at some point in time before we actually set the referendum. My thinking is, if we set a town budget and when we go through the reval and see how it pans out, if we feel we are not comfortable with this going to referendum at $9 million, we can always change that number. At that point in time, if that happens, and I'm hopeful it does not, we could say, okay, here are the items that we're going to defer on this, going back to, window, stucco, brick, whatever it is, and this is how much the savings would be, so we'd feel more comfortable at a budget. Those aren't something I'd want to do now, but I just ask the committee to keep those things in mind, so if we are at a point when we're looking at the numbers for the budget, we are uncomfortable with that $9 million going forward, there is a backup plan. So with that, if anyone has any further comments, please feel free to jump in. If not, Joe, go ahead.
I'll just say that obviously I've been on this committee with everybody, and I have to thank, Russ and the architects to what they've been doing, and obviously, again, what Johnny was saying, that there's really no fluff here. We know it's almost a one-time deal to get this done. And obviously, I have a third generation here. My children went through that school. I went through there, my father, so there's pride. And I think sometimes if three things Farmington is known for is A, the traffic on Route 4, the Big Bird Bridge, and our high school at the top of the hill. So I would love to see that building remain and be utilized for future use.
Very good.
Fifth generation.
Okay. Just wanted to hear the trump card over here.
Monteith was my great-grandfather. How you like that, man?
We had years ago.
CJ put me up to it.
I asked him to say that.
It's his birthday. I had to do something.
Okay. That being said, if there are no more questions, we have a motion on the table. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion passed unanimously. Thank you.
All right. Agenda item number 4, I'd like to make a motion to charge the 1928 Building Committee to complete the attached requirements of the planning and construction process of building project per 53-4 of the Town of Farmington Code.
Kathy?
So we have a Chapter 53 is our town code, which is our procedures and plan. And just a...
Go ahead, say that.
Second.
Sorry, second. Yeah. I called on you before you said
I
second.
usually interrupt.
The fifth generation.
Okay.
He's packing. No, that's on CJ. He was packing up.
Fifth generation can't second.
I jumped the gun. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So again, just high level, what you're charging the committee right now is completion of the schematic designs. That will happen between January and April. Community presentations and community outreach with an anticipated referendum. They're going to get us to referendum for April 2023, and we're going to follow the ordinance to do that.
Very good. Any questions for Kathy on that? Can anyone repeat what she just said? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion passed unanimously. Okay. Item E, new business.
I'd like to make a motion for agenda item E1 to have Matt Ross to the Unionville Historic District for the vacancy to fill immediately and end September 30th, 2024.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Wasn't where I thought it was coming from, but that's okay. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Okay, item F, executive session. None. Before adjourning, I'll give you a quote from Frederick Douglass that I think is probably appropriate this evening. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. With that, I will ask for a move to adjourn.
I will first like to wish you a very happy birthday.
Thank you.
And thank you, Alex, for sharing him with us tonight, wherever you are. I'm sure you're
Not watching, I guarantee you that.
And I'd like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting on January 24th, 2023 of the Town Council.
Second.
Motion a second, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. 9:26.